Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Today I want to make a video about rules lawyers. Caius Wallen, I believe, posted in the Facebook RPG Brigade page probably this morning, and there's already like a flurry of activity on his post about rules lawyers, not surprisingly. But before I get going on that, I want to talk about the experience I had today with rules lawyers at the Department of Motor Vehicles. So my youngest daughter, 21 years old, she still hasn't gotten a driver's license yet. She hasn't needed to get one. So take her down to the DMV for her learner's permit appointment. Apparently you need an appointment to get a learner's permit now. Or you need to pay money to do that because you have to take a knowledge test. And things have changed since I got my driver's license, quite some time ago. So go down there. This is the third time she's been down there. And each time they tell her she's missing something else. And they assure her that this is now the new complete list. And so this time, she's brought down mail addressed to her at her place of residence. But unfortunately, they tell her this time, no, you need mail from 2 different sources. But don't worry, what you can do is if they're not sending you a lot of mail there, because they're not, because she lives at college and, people aren't sending her a lot of bills or mail to her mom's house, they say, write a letter to yourself and address it to yourself, and that way it will prove that you live there. And at this point, I was a little frustrated, and I managed to keep my cool, but I get upset because they made my daughter cry. And so I asked him, well, hey, wait a minute. That's a little fraudulent, don't you think? Like, in other words, if I was to write a letter to myself, put my name on it, but send it to your address, that wouldn't prove that I lived at your house, but they'd mail it there. And they said, oh, no, sir, they absolutely would not mail a letter to my house with your name on it because you don't live there. So pretty much what I did was not get arrested because I didn't call this person probably the stupidest person I've ever met. But they were a rules lawyer, and they were paid to be a rules lawyer, so that's how it goes. So anyhow, that's a really pejorative term, and of course you can imagine that when Caius posted this, that there were people on one side of the argument and on the other side of the argument. And not surprisingly, as I'm watching people post, because I decided I'm going to refrain and not really get involved in this discussion, and just kind of see where it goes, because I know what I would have said 5 years ago. It depended a lot of times on the people's perspectives in terms of what kind of gaming style they liked and what their intentions were when they sat down at the table. And some people made it very clear they're there to play a game. And of course, having a mastery of the rules is really important. There are other people that were, more in the camp that the rulings are, take precedence over that. And a subset of those people, maybe a different set, because I would have been one of those people that definitely would still say occasionally, well, the ruling should probably come first in many cases, in the moment. But I'll get back to that because that's not my entire point. And I've kind of changed my views on this a little bit. But there are people that say, hey, what's really important is the narrative and the story. And if the rules are going to get in the way of that, then it's not as important. And so there was a lot of bantering and discussion back and forth between these camps, which you can imagine that was going to happen. And so one of the reasons I stayed out of it. Nobody's a bad person there, I don't believe. It's just kind of like they come with very different intentions and very different perspectives on the game. And as I've talked about many, many times as we talk to each other as hobby, the hobby is so broad in terms of preferences and styles and what have you, that oftentimes we can talk to each other, use the same words, and start to come to the conclusion that the other person is crazy because they're just plain old doing it wrong. So, anyhow, what are my thoughts on this? Because I'm sure you want to know because you're watching my channel. I like to try to put a positive spin on this for the most part. System mastery is a good thing. And there's definitely times that, there's going to be somebody at the table that knows the rules better than everybody else. And maybe they're not the game master. And so sometimes you can sling around the pejorative term rules lawyer. What it is you might be a little bit, your ego might be a little bit bruised, because John knows the rules better than you do, and he might bring something up. I've tried to get to the point, now where like if I don't know the rules as much as somebody else, I certainly have done this as a player a lot. Say, well, hey, what happens here? But I'm becoming more and more comfortable as a game master saying, hey, how does this particular part of the game work? And stopping. I think, what it really boils down to is the intention of the people at the table. First of all, hopefully you've had some kind of, I hate the word social contract, but I guess it's as good as any. Some kind of session zero where you've decided, okay, what is our focus going to be? And in the case of something like this, where maybe somebody's made a mistake, do we bring this up now, in the moment, or do you wait until after the game session and say, hey, over here, you probably could have handled this a little bit differently. You actually did the rule a little wrong, and here's, let me show you how it goes. So next time, it's, we're on the same page, or whatever. To me, that's the way I'd prefer to do it, unless it's something that's so egregious or so crazy that it's something that you need to stop in the game at that point. And a lot of that boils down to something like good GM fiat and bad GM fiat. The idea, is the game master just saying something because they're not entirely sure and let's just move the game along, or that's what they believe the rules say, or is it something where they're altering the rules because they don't like them or they want to move the story in a way that they think it ought to go. And so the intentions of all the people at the table are really important to kind of take into account. Is the intention of the person that's being the rules lawyer to be a jerk or to be a show off or to be a know-it-all, or oftentimes, maybe not oftentimes, but we all know this one person that does it because they're looking for the loopholes. They're looking to kind of get one over. They're looking to really game the system. Some people just really enjoy being contentious and stopping everybody else's fun. Hopefully, it seems like there's not too many people out there like that, but there are people out there that just, like to bring things to a screeching halt. And there are people that I know that just plain old enjoy controversy. I choose not to game with them for very long or to associate with them for a very long period. But we all know those people. But sometimes we can sling around the term rules lawyer people when simply they're trying to help, and they know the system maybe better, or they realize you've forgotten something here. But that's one of those things you have to have those discussions with, like, hey, unless it's really night and day important, this is going to make a gigantic difference to what's happening at the table, then bring us up afterwards. I certainly had some situations in games recently where I knew, like as a player, I made a mistake. And it was funny. I had one that was kind of like karma. I knew I made one mistake in my All for One, the second game, which actually got broadcast. I knew I made a mistake early on, which was to my advantage. And then not so long after that, I made a mistake the other way and actually took an injury, more of an injury than I probably should have taken. And it was to my disadvantage. So I figured those two canceled each other out. So it was good. I did the wrong thing for an initiative roll, and later on I did the wrong thing when applying a modifier to my dice pool, my defensive dice pool. And probably took more damage than I should have. But in those moments, it wasn't that important to stop the game and say, hey, wait a minute, I did this wrong. It was like a learning experience. And speaking of learning experiences, and I probably should have said this earlier on, RuneSlinger actually posted a second video, a shortened version of the broadcast, where he kind of cut out a lot of the extraneous stuff where we're just kind of messing around. And it was about what was going on behind the scenes with the rules of this All for One game, and so he put a lot of annotations as it goes on, or like how did I adjudicate this, or how does this particular rule work, or when this guy was casting what was a spell, which I wasn't even aware that somebody was casting a spell at that time. What was the effect here? How many dice were involved with this? Why did I make this call? What was this player doing? What was this player doing right? What were all the mechanics? They kind of took the veil off, and you got to see the engine. All the mechanics behind the scenes. That was great. I think I watched that. And I'm thinking, man, people ought to do that with their actual plays a lot more. Not all of them, but when you're running a game that's a little obscure, people don't know what it is, or not as many people know how it works. Maybe maybe even some of the more popular ones, at least once. But I think most of those, they've taken care of that quite a bit. Having a video like that where you kind of expose what's going on, it took a lot of work, I'm sure, on his part to go back and cut that and annotate it, but it made it just crystal clear and transparent. I think the hobby needs more of those. Is that really that's not really rules lawyering, but it's exposing what the rules look like in the background, because I like them to be in the background. That's why I'm kind of one of those people that's really in favor of, like, hey, don't stop the session, but after the session, just when we talk about it, say, hey, this one particular part here, you forgot this one thing, and that turns you from being somebody that deserves the pejorative label rules lawyer to being somebody that like has some system mastery and says, hey, I'll give you some help here, and what do you think about that? Like here, just kind of give you some pointers. So that's really kind of my I'm just making sure I didn't forget anything else really clever I wrote down. But yeah, it's about motivations. It's about kind of like tact, and about being a decent person, but like not forgetting that the rules are there for a reason. And as long as the people's motivations, on all sides, the game master, the other players, and the person that's bringing up, the person with system mastery, as long as our motivations are pretty much on the up and up, not a bad thing. It's all about timing and tact. How about that?